Welcome to the Resilience Files, a podcast investigating human stories of struggle and triumph in the quest to explore the true nature of well-being and resilience and discover the secret to a resilience that lasts. I first came across Paul Jones at a conference we were both attending in Cape Town, South Africa in 2014. I was mesmerized by both Paul's presence as well as his powerful story, which moved me very deeply. Paul has a fascinating bio, which you can access via links to his website in the notes below. But for me, why I loved speaking to Paul today is because of his depth, his passion, his heart, and his vulnerability. Paul cares for people deeply and believes in people. He recognizes the resources that lie within us fallible but incredible human beings. In listening to this podcast, you will understand why he has spent 27 years traversing the globe as an in-demand advisor, public speaker, and consultant. You will hear his moving story of his daughter Candice's battle with addiction to heroin on the streets of Hillbrow in Johannesburg that led to the creation of 1 Million Strong, an organization which focuses on raising the next generation of leaders in countries across Africa and soon to be Europe too. But as we probe and investigate Paul's story, you will also hear the unexpected loss, the heartbreak, and the grief that he and his family encountered just as he thought they had finally found some peace. I'm so excited for you to hear this one. It's truly a story of the human spirit in its full expression.
So Paul, welcome to the Resilience Files podcast. I'm so excited to have you here, all the way from South Africa. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Terry. It's good to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Okay, no, you're welcome. After we reconnected on Zoom the other day, I feel like there's so much that I want to talk to you about. I've prepared a few questions, but I'm happy to deviate from them as well. Are you okay if I kind of dive right in?
Sure.
Okay.
100%.
So the first question, cutting right to the chase, 1 Million Strong. That's a bold name. It's a strong name. So what is 1 Million Strong and what inspired it? Could you tell us?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know quite where the name came from. I was participated in authoring a book with a number of people, and I think it was something about 2 billion, whatever. And I thought, well, that's very audacious. But when I was looking for a name for my foundation, I I thought about 1 million strong, and people often ask me, well, what's the 1 million for? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? And, is it about 1 million people? And I don't even really know, Terry. I just really like the name. And when our guys did the branding, I just loved what they did with the branding. I don't know if you've probably seen the logo. You'll see there's wings, which is obviously giving young people the ability to fly. But in the middle of those wings, there's a compass. And I just love that tension between, yes, it's fine to fly, but you better have direction in your life. And so I just loved how the whole thing came together. And that's 1 million strong. Yeah.
I love that because there's a saying that a kind of friend of ours who's a bit of a mentor once said to me in Brown, he said, dream with your feet on the ground. And I love that. Yes. That's that kind of, as you're saying, dream with your feet on the ground, be grounded, have that North Star, yes, and then dream, so that's...
I've got to tell you, it's a bit off track, but when I got married, it was my second marriage. I think I was about 40. And my friend, who was my best man at the wedding, he said, Paul's found the right woman in his life because he's got his head in the clouds, but she'll make sure his feet are on the ground.
Good combination. She's your yin to your yang.
Excellent. And he was right. He was right.
Yes. So what inspired 1 Million Strong? What was the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, it's a very personal story, Terry. I've always been passionate about working with young people, and I was a business consultant for many years. And And I've done a lot of leadership development, a lot of working with older people. But when I say older people, I mean not old people, but old,
Yes,
mature
I get
people.
it. We old
And
people.
although I still do some of that and enjoy it, I just love young people. I love being with young people. I love interacting with young people. It's been part of the journey of my life. And my eldest daughter, Candy, experimented with drugs and so on when she was 15. And fortunately, there was a day where she, gave it up and whatever. But I just thought, that was what inspired me, is to set up a foundation that would help other young people not fall off the cliff. I've got, in a presentation I do, I always got this, like a cliff where people are falling off the cliff, and I've got like judges standing there, one with a 6, one with a 9, as they always do, whether it's a diving competition or a dance competition. It's like, you get it. And because I do feel sometimes we're not fully aware of people falling off that cliff. There's a massive amount of money that goes into getting to people who've already fallen off the cliff. You take rehab centers, you take prisons. We put people into prison, but it costs millions to keep people there. And yet, sometimes people are reluctant to invest earlier on to stop people falling down that cliff. And then we often have to reap the you know the fruit of our labor, or the fruit of not doing what we're supposed to do. And I've been fortunate enough to speak in a couple of prisons, even in Northern Ireland. I spoke at the the highest level, and just speaking to those people and interacting with it. There's always, what if something happened? What if there was an intervention earlier in their life? Would they have ended up where they are today? And so that's my inspiration, is to try and get. And I wrote a program called Breakthrough, which is aimed at kids between 11 and 14. And by the way, we're now looking at even younger, because we're finding, from the time when I wrote it to now, we find young girls, having sex at 10, 11 years of age, and young boys who are just not good examples. And so we want to try and get to kids as young as possible. So that's my inspiration. It's what drives every day of my life, is to try
Yes.
and get to young people to stop them from going down the road.
Yeah, I feel very aligned with that sentiment, Paul. I mean, one of the quotes that we often quote at iHeart when we talk about our iHeart learning framework, we quote Desmond Tutu, who said we need to stop pulling people out of the river downstream, and we need to go, upstream to the source, to the root cause. And that's very much what our framework does. We look to go to the root cause, and again, working with young people. So I'm right with you. Otherwise, all we're doing is we just, trying to alleviate symptoms. But yeah. So let me just ask you about Candice, and a bit about her story, because it's such a big part of 1 Million Strong. Like, what kind of child was she growing up? And were there like kind of indications that she was going to have a challenging journey? Like, I'm sure there are other parents thinking, are there signs that you think were that like she was a strong spirit or something around her, an independent-minded person, that you thought, looking back, you could see, yeah, there were certain kind of signs, or maybe not?
I think it's, I've been asked that question many times, Terry, because I think it's every parent asks that question. Can you pick up something early enough to stop it from happening? And yes and no, I suppose. I think Candy, when she was growing up, was a very strong-willed child, top of her class. She danced for the UCT School of Ballet. She had provincial colors in swimming. She was a sport, really, in everything she did, she excelled. Um, I think sometimes things happen in life, Terry, which is a trigger. And if I look back, the trigger was, we moved from Johannesburg down to Cape Town, and it was in grade 7, which was standard 5, which is still primary school. And it was not a good time to move, but my career, my job moved us here, and it was around about Easter, so it was around about April. So she was in the last year of primary school, hadn't been with the kids. It was quite a, upper middle class. Well, I don't know what you would call it, but it was a good school, Claremont Primary. And I think what happened was when she came here or went to the school, she wasn't part of any of the maybe the kids who were doing really well or whatever. She seemed to be drawn towards, or others kind of like befriended her because maybe she was also a pretty girl on the outside. She was a bit of an outlier. and and so she started mixing with the wrong friends, and we tried to manage that. We even changed schools, but sort of, as she went into high school, and we know the most vulnerable time in any child's life, not just according to me, but statistically, is when they go from what we would call primary school to high school or secondary school. It's a very vulnerable time because you meet people you don't know. It's a time to be cool.
You're forming an
And
identity, really.
yes, yes, yeah, searching for your own identity. Where do you fit in? And so, in many respects, I feel we almost ripped her out of this space where she was in a very good space, mixing with the right kids, and brought her into an environment where she was struggling. And unfortunately, that provided an opportunity for her to start networking with kids that we just felt weren't right for her, which is also very difficult, like how do I decide that some child is not good enough to be my child's friend? Or but we did feel that in many respects, and although we tried to stop it, it just wasn't possible. And that's when she started experimenting with drugs, um, went into rehab, stopped doing all sport. And it was a very, so yes, there were certainly warning signs. Whether we picked it up soon enough or not, I don't know. And I think, if there are parents out there listening, I think, and I'm sure there will be, the relationship between husband and wife, in standing together during those really, when you feel there's something, is extremely, extremely important. And I honestly don't feel that we did that for Candice. There wasn't that where husband and wife stood together, where the child can't play one off against the other, and so on. And so that's a whole discussion in and of itself. I mean,
Yeah.
you've had
It's
6 kids, you know what I'm talking about.
It's beautiful that you bring that up, by the way, because I often feel that when we do parenting courses and things, I even often say to my colleagues when we're writing, the relationship between husband and wife is such an important part of the parenting dynamic, and often that's almost seen as a separate course, the relationship course.
Yes.
But you can't actually separate those two things. I mean, so I'm so with you. But I also feel, Paul, I mean, this isn't what did I do wrong and what happened, because I think you and me both feel there's something about our journeys which are meant to be, and we learn. Candice's journey was the perfect journey for her soul, and what came out of it for both her, for you, for for the world, has been so powerful. That's just part of what happens out of human suffering. Often, I was talking to another guest about the butterfly wouldn't become the butterfly if it didn't have to first go through the metamorphosis of the caterpillar. That just seems to be the way of life. So yeah.
And yet, Terry, we know that. But when you're in the midst of that storm, man, those little cliches and those little, which are supposed to be pearls of wisdom, they you almost want to say to somebody, just shut up. You don't know what you're talking about, because your situation is so real, so personal. Yeah, I mean, waking up in the middle of the night and your daughter's in Hillbrow on some street somewhere, it just, it, you can't explain what you go through, you know. So, um,
Well, I mean, it was it's kind of life and death, and it's crisis, and the thing, and I wanted to, with your permission, just so that our listeners can get a sense of how dire it was for Candice and for your family when she was in the midst, kind of this addiction. If I could just play a little extract from a video you sent me, and then I wanted to ask you your thoughts on this little clip. Is that okay with
sure.
you?
Yeah, 100%.
About a minute in that. You'll recognize this, but I'm just playing it so.
To try and make myself feel better, and at this stage I was living on the street.
Living in the slums of Hillbrow, Candice was addicted to heroin and surviving any way she could.
I got to a point where I just wanted to die.
I wasn't sure if I'd even see Candice alive again.
The one day I was scoring, and I sat down on the pavement and I said to God, I need you to help me because I don't have much longer to live. I could literally feel my soul leaving. I knew that it was nearly over.
One day Candice called me and she said, "Daddy, I'm going to die." And I said, "Yes, Candy, you are going to die. And you're the only one that can do something about that."
And I used what I had just bought, and I phoned my father and I told him I needed help. Giving you my heart, all that is within.
After hitting rock bottom,
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest revelations, epiphany for me in my journey with Candice's addiction is the realization that I was her enabler. I attended a workshop which was run by Tough Love, and I realized me bailing Candice out the whole time, providing a roof over her head, and her not being accountable to anybody, had to stop. And it was one of the biggest decisions. I wrestled with myself for a very long time. And I remember one time Candice phoning me about 1 o'clock in the morning, and from the Joburg Gen, saying, "Daddy, I've got no way." I said, "Candy, I'm sorry, my darling. You know the rules of the game. And I almost feel people will judge me for what I'm saying." But Candice would echo my words. Tough love is tough love. And if I didn't do that, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know what the end result would have been. But thankfully, she did phone me, and even though I practiced tough love, I used to go visit her at least once every 2 weeks in Hillbrow, but I would never give her money. And I could see her deteriorating, and I would literally, we always used to go to the Nando's in Hillbrow, and I would get in my car and drive off, and I could never travel more than 100 meters or 200 meters because I would just break down and cry because I thought I would never see her again. But that day came when she did walk out of Hillbrow.
Yeah.
Paul, I just that video clip when and I thought what was so powerful is that she spoke to God. She was at the lowest point in her life, and she turned to God, which also really touched me. It speaks about.
Well, often when I tell the story, or when I do tell the story, I always say, for people who don't know what Hillbrow is, I used to say, well, it's a God-forsaken place. But it wasn't a God-forsaken place, because even in the midst of that God-forsakenness, more as a figure of speech, God did and because she knew the way, she grew up in a house where God was very much part of our life, and I think, you know, you you being Jewish know this, train up a child in the ways that they should go, and they will not depart therefrom. And I think there's definitely a measure of truth in that, is that, yes, sometimes we do the prodigal son journey and head off in another direction, but somehow we find ourselves back with a father, and I just love that story, whether you believe it's not necessary, it's a parable, so parables are hugely complicated, but it's a story of life, and I think we've all been on our own journey. I mean, I've been on my journey. I'm sure you've been on yours, as you have. I mean, I've heard your story, so yeah.
Paul, it's interesting when you say that, because, part of how, like, our organization, Our Heart, expresses it to young people, like, there's this deep foundational part of ourselves, which is our natural self, which is loving. And, there's, like, I'd say to you, we don't say this when we teach in kind of the secular world, but there's a spark of God in us. There's a soul in us, and that's pure, and that knows right from wrong, and that's where connection happens. That's where clarity emerges from, and that part can be covered up, and it does get covered up, but it can't be in any way diminished or broken or scarred. It's almost sacrosanct. It's always within us, and that kind of part of Candice, even as you say, in this kind of godforsaken place of Hillbrow, in the streets of Hillbrow, it was still there, in kind of shining, even if it was a dim light, which is beautiful. And the other thing which I loved about what you spoke about is that there's so many parents I speak to who are still, because of what I feel is a misguided love, and there's no judgment on that, right? But it is misguided. It's like, we say the path to hell is paved with good intentions, but this love of supporting their kids in their drug addicts or in their destructive behavior, because we love our kids, because what's going to happen, because they'll get on the streets if I don't do this, then etc., etc. And that kind of short-term view, which looks like it's in service to them in the short term, in the long term is incredibly harmful. But it's courageous and it's brave, and there's no guarantees when you take that tough love. But to me, it's the way to go. It has to be, because the other way can't be, because of all the messages that it's giving somebody, and almost buying into the destructive patterns that they're struggling with. It's almost reaffirming them, which can't be the way to kind of a redemption or a salvation or any kind of progression. So yeah, very, very, but hard. I get that.
And I think your point is so relevant, Terry, that love, and I think one of the issues of the word love in the English language is we only have one word. I love my cat, I love my dog, I love a good pasta, I love, it's and it's like, and I really love my wife, but I want another, and it's not. And so sometimes I think what we were speaking about is maybe it's not the kind of love that is necessary to bring about healing. I think there's a deeper level of love where the Greek language is wonderful, because there's 4 different words or 5 different words for love, which all have a totally different meaning, totally different. So it's way more descriptive of, agape as opposed to storge or eros or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And I think we are limited in our vocabulary in being able to express or understand what real love is, and of course, people's own emotional intelligence, their own personal journey, maybe they haven't, that genuine agape kind of a love is so different to just the normal love that you would express.
Yes.
But to get to that stage where you can actually feel that is a massive journey in itself, Anyway, am I going? I don't mean to go off.
No, that's perfect. And I love that you say that because, you know, when you hit that deeper love that you're talking about, it's, you know, even what looks like kindness is different, you know, because often what looks like kindness is not kindness, you know. So, you know, everything that comes out of that love is informed, I think, by a deeper intelligence. But as you say, it's, you know, it can be a journey to find that, but it's worth reflecting on it and knowing that it's there and knowing that it's different, you know, that there are, as you say, yeah.
And it's certainly worthwhile pursuing that, you know. I mean, you know, that's it's to take responsibility in ourselves to say, I can go beyond just this, because love is not what I can get out of it. It goes around a deep sense of caring and understanding, but also to not just say yes or think you're being kind or think you're being unkind, because sometimes being kind would be interpreted as being my thing about saying to my daughter, I'm sorry, you know the rules. You know, I mean, I speak about it glibly, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. You know, it wasn't that I was being unkind, but I knew we couldn't continue doing that, where I'm her savior and constantly being brought to save her after she'd made those choices to be where she is.
Yes, yes. You know, the message of, I always say this, that in the kind of turnaround of my story, there was a moment where I kind of saw that it was up to me. Because before I'd kind of thought all my problems, you know, I felt that my parents needed to take responsibility for their part and my husband did for his part. And there were a lot of people that needed to, you know, and yeah. And I remember having this really deep insight and it was funny how it emerged, because the first thing that emerged is that it's really up to me. No one else can save me. And it was after I tried to take my own life, because I realized that I could actually take my life. And I thought, if I can take my life and no one can stop me, then only I can almost keep myself alive and find life, what it means to live. And I remember the first thing was I felt incredibly lonely, because I felt like on my own in this. And then afterwards, it felt incredibly liberating. It felt incredibly liberating. So it went from lonely and then into liberating and empowering. And almost from that moment, I spoke about a shift where it looked like life was coming through me instead of coming at me. There was some kind of shift psychologically. So, yeah.
And you know, Terry, that's so powerful, because normally that's driven out of fear, is, you know, this thing that it's easier to blame. And there's a great little quote that I often use, you know, while I'm blaming somebody else, I actually deny myself the power to change. Because it's somebody else's problem, and that's easy. Anybody, we've all done it, you know. I mean, Adam did it to Eve, or Eve did it to Adam, you know. It's like, no, God, that woman that you gave me, that woman you gave me, she's the one. So, isn't it weird? Like, there in Genesis 1 or 2, there's the story where we started doing that, and we do it all the time. And we've almost got to catch ourselves that we don't do that, you know, and to say, because I often speak to, whether it's young people or older people, when we're talking about personal transformation, I say, there's one thing you need to do. And if you do that, you're probably 80% of your way to transformation. And that is to accept a deep level of personal responsibility for your life. And to understand the keys to your happiness do not belong to anybody other than to yourself. And I know that's hard, because people find themselves in all kinds of situations. But you can't say, well, that truth only works there, it doesn't work there. It's a truth. Taking personal responsibility for your life, conquering those fears that you had. I mean, it would have been fear that drove you to that final thing, that I'm going to take my life. It's easier to go down this road than to actually go up this road. So, man, and if we can just do that, and you had this phenomenal experience which transformed your life, and look what you're going on to do, Terry. It's amazing. Well done. I mean, because there's resilience there, you know. I'm not just blowing smoke, I mean that, you know. It's hundreds and if not thousands of hours of discipline and and just working through your issues, because you don't just arrive in the space that you're in.
Yeah. Well, you know, Paul, part of what we, very much aligned with you, teach children is that, you know, our mind's the creation of our reality. You know, we're living in the experience of our mind. You know, as David Bohm, the scientist, said, it's not just, you know, kind of looking at reality and we kind of, like a journalist commenting, we participatory, we creating that experience of it. And the parts of us that are the resources that are equipped to deal with life, these kind of deeper resources of wisdom and love and clarity and connection and being able to adapt and be able to learn, these lie within us. So we have all the necessary resources to create a beautiful life for us, to mess up, to correct, to learn, you know, all those kinds of things. But it's almost our own creation. And you know, and to learn how to deal with the world, which does not always treat us well or do the right thing. But we have the capacity to learn how to deal with that, to heal from stuff, to, you know, to work that out. And so all the answers kind of lie inside. And so looking for them outside is it's such a wild goose chase, you know, and it's so dissatisfying. Anyhow.
And it's disempowering. That's the big thing. It's disempowering. So it doesn't cause you to do anything, because it's actually somebody else's problem. Exactly. And I'm just the product of that somebody else's problem. And I think, you know, women particularly, and I only say this because I've worked with a number of them who have been in an abusive relationship. You know, it's, they can't believe that they've been in that relationship for 20 years, you know, or 15 years. And maybe because it wasn't always physical and it was emotional, that it wasn't as bad. And typically the abuser is always incredibly sorry afterwards. But once they do finally get enough courage, man, the amount of courage necessary, you know, and I've spoken to women where they've literally picked up their children and put them in the car and driven off, you know, I mean, amazing. Wow, amazing. Massive courage to do that, massive. And that's the big, you know, you're 80% of the way of them embarking on this journey of then self-discovery, and stop blaming this one and that one, but actually learning and finding a whole new life for yourself, you know.
And you know what's interesting, Paul, on this point is that people often think if I've like got agency, if I've got responsibility, they somehow feel that that's letting people get away with things, etc. Or it's pointing a finger at me instead of the world, you know. And they start to think, well, I'd rather point fingers at, you know, people who've hurt me than point up. But it doesn't happen like that in actuality, because my experience and all the kids and young people and adults I've worked with, the experience is, and I know for me, that as soon as I kind of started to see that the power, kind of the locus of power, was within me rather than outside of me, I started to get deeply, deeply compassionate towards myself. You know, I started to remember I had this, and to others, too. Exactly. So that compassion, that forgiveness comes, you know, the kind of pointing either way and the guilt or the letting people, you know, it's not, it was, it's a very compassionate place, as you say, to yourself and to others. And if anybody needs to be held to account, they are held to account. If not by you, by other means, etc. It happens, you know. But yeah. So it's just interesting that people often think that, you know, and I saw that on 1 Million Strong, you had said, we challenge young people to stand up and take responsibility for their lives. You know, I saw that was one of the things you wrote on your website. You also wrote to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. What do you mean by be part of the solution, not part? We also use that phrase, but I wanted to understand from your point of view what that phrase means to you.
Well, I think, again, you know, Terry, that phrase is a cliche in many respects, but we need to think about it. You know, I mean, we've all sat at dinner parties where people complain about the government, or they complain, they've always got an opinion about everything, and, you know, so-and-so does a rubbish job. And, you know, especially in South Africa, it's probably more prevalent. Although I know a lot of people in the UK, and I've been there many times. I actually said to a friend of mine the other day, I've never known a nation who could put themselves down as much as the Brits do. And I actually said, after what they've just been through in the last few days, they should stand tall and be proud of themselves, you know, and find a new, renewed. But anyway, let's not go there. the point that I'm trying to make is that we all part of this where we talk about things. And I almost love to at a dinner party and then say to somebody, do you just mind telling me what you do to resolve that? Are you involved in any way in somehow making a difference?
Yeah.
And it's almost like you've hit them with a rock, because it's, they want to continue complaining. They want to, continue. And so for me, we all have to take personal responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for this world that we live in, for the country we live in, for the people. And so I think that's the point that I'm trying to make, Terry, is that, we don't want to just talk the talk. I really want to walk the walk. And the kids that we're targeting, they're not my responsibility.
Yes.
But in many respects, they have become my responsibility, because whether it's a mantle I've put on, or I was speaking to a whole bunch of kids a week ago. I was in tears, just because I look at them and I think of what they've still got to go through in life. But I have a deep, deep compassion for them, and I know it's not my role to instill that within anybody, but why is it that some people can't find anything they're passionate about? I don't know. Maybe they just. There's a great book I read many years ago, and it was called Half Time, and the title wasn't as significant as the subtitle of the book. The subtitle was Moving from Success to Significance, and I think it speaks about people who get into their 40s, late 40s. They've kind of like had a career and they're looking to do something more with their life. And I love that movie, and I've taught on that, about moving from success to significance and finding what is your significance. What is it that you're looking for in life? What do you want to do? And he wrote a subsequent book, and he said, thanks for the feedback, whatever. But he said he'd been thinking about what happens to those who don't find something significant. And he said he's come to a realization that those who do not move from success to significance move from success to bitterness. And I think that is unbelievably profound, because I can sit in dinner parties where there's older people, they've been successful, but they've never found something more to do with their lives. And I don't think it's ever too late, but they believe it's too late. And so they end up always talking about the past, sending you videos or showing, this was at our daughter's 21st, 50 years ago, whatever it might be. And I just feel we need more people to do something, and I love it, because I think what you're doing and what we're doing hopefully will keep us young, Terry,
Yeah, I hope so. Sometimes I feel old, Paul.
We still listen to funky music.
That's true. But Paul, it's funny because one of my other podcast guests is a Cirque du Soleil performer, and she, like at the age of 11, went to watch the Cirque du Soleil, which is like the highest level of circus, if you can call it that you can see. Yes. It's like magic. When she was 11 years old, and she literally just lived around the corner from me, goes to a local school that I know, went to, and most little girls who would go to a performance like that would think, oh, I wish I could be in that, But she actually made it a reality. It wasn't just this improbable dream, She went along the path, had the discipline, etc., the self-belief, even when, things didn't go so well in the rejections. And she ended up becoming like the main character in one of their most iconic shows, like traveling the world with them for 7 years. And I spoke to her a lot about that because I said, I can see that my 10-year-old has this belief that he can be whatever he wants. You know, he believes he can, I can see he's got all these kind of loves and passions. Often what happens is that starts to be covered as, you know, kids think, well, not me, you know, that's for other people, etc. And I've got to get something that brings more security, because there's kind of risk with going after your dreams, and you've got to be prepared to fail and learn and make it up and etc. But that kind of freedom to pursue that and that kind of belief in yourself, and often it's helpful, you know, I've got this little sign here next to me on the table that says, believe in your children and they believe in yourself. But often it's helpful when there's somebody that believes in you, that can actually see that, and you know, people often say and believes in them just because, and draws that out of the child. I don't feel that the education system is always able to do that, you know, and so that's probably, you know, where programs like yours and mine and the many other good programs that are there are so important, because we want to light that kind of spark that's in every child, but it's almost, it needs to be lit and encouraged to burn, you know, fiercely enough that it's brave enough to face all the challenges and the disappointments that come along the way, because that path isn't always easy, you know, that path kind of following your dream, but it's so rewarding, as you say, and so energizing, you know.
And I think, you know, we use youth coaches, we call them youth coaches. It's guys between 20 and 30 years of age who actually facilitate the programs. And they're brilliant. I mean, they are just amazing. And they become the older brother, older sister role models for the kids. Because, you know, I think the sad thing is, Terry, is, you know, parents are supposed to be a safe place. Your home is supposed to be a safe place for a child, for any child. And the function of the father and the mother who are good parents is to protect their children as much as they can, not overly protect them, but that's a safe haven where they model principles and values and those things that are really the foundation on which the life of a child is built. And yet we find many of the kids, I would say by far the majority of the kids, come from homes that are broken. Father might not be present, or the mother. I mean, whatever it is, just totally dysfunctional backgrounds. And I think, what chance does a child have in growing up in that environment? That's what makes it so incredibly, and that's why I really wish more people would get involved, even if they just take on 5 kids that I spend an hour a month with, you know, and just come talk to me, or let's go play in the park, or just so that there's somebody that this child can look up to as a role model, you know.
Yeah. I'm so with you. I mean, my boys, my older boys, have all been those kind of role models for younger kids. And I just see that those kids being able to look at someone who they think, I could be that. And this person's normal, they balance, they look like they're enjoying life, they've got good, but it's rooted in good values, is gold dust, you know. So, and they had those role models too. You know, it wasn't just the family that had that. I said my kids when they were younger to these, and they had those kind of, you know. So I'm with you. It makes a massive. So I've got another question for you. You said that on your website that you want young people to be strong enough to say yes to the right things and no to the right things. So I wanted to ask you about that, because do you always think it's a matter of strength? And the reason that I'm asking that is that it seems to me that there's also an element of discernment or judgment that we need to help our kids with, because, you know, sometimes the wrong things look right and the right things look wrong. You know, people can feel they're being very strong and following their convictions, but there's a confusion. There's not a discernment between what's right and what's wrong. You know, those become very confused, especially in this day where outside voices of social media and that are so loud. It's confusing for our youth. So
It's unbelievably confusing, Terry. And I think this is, you know, modern day society almost teaches us that there are no absolutes, you know, that we almost have to find our own values in life. But I don't think we as a human race are capable of doing that, quite honestly. I think we need wisdom literature, we need guidance, we need role models that are not soccer players or musos. We, I've been very fortunate to have a mentor in my life who is, and he still is today at the age of 86. He started Wimpy in South Africa and built one of the biggest brands in the Southern Hemisphere. But Eric has played a very, very important role in my life. I'm sad, though, that as I lecture and train all over the world, there's very few people that who have somebody like that in their lives. I also have a spiritual father who lives in the States, but we connect at least once a month. And just for me, knowing that I've got, and I suppose the big thing is, I would never want to disappoint those men. And because of the high regard they have of me. And so they almost it's kind of like, would Eric do that? What would Eric do in a situation? How would he handle this kind of situation? Or how would Sam feel about this? And so it helps me on what I believe to be the straight and narrow, which is not the straight and narrow is not, it's a great place to be, in fact,
Yes.
If we've got all of these things where anything goes, you go down that road, man, I tell you, that's a slippery road, and see where you end up. And I think that's, no, it's not fun. It might be for a while. And I mean, we've seen that, is that kids need, to operate and adults do. We all need parameters where we feel safer, because the minute you start playing outside of that, man, I tell you, you're going to end up where you really don't want to go.
It's such a good point.
And to get back is almost impossible. I mean, that's the hard part. You can go down that road, but to find your way back, wow, it's hugely damaging, hugely.
So there are two things that of you said that just brought something to mind for me, which is maybe something I've taken for granted, which has been largely influenced by my husband, but this need for having good mentors, in our lives. Yes. He's somebody who that's important to, and he's always sought those out at different stages of our lives, and they've maybe changed. Obviously, we're Orthodox Jews, and we kind of almost have the blueprint of our Torah, which is almost, and kind of God's word, which is the ultimate kind of guide for us to check in with, in terms of a North Star. But these kind of figures in our lives, and it's also something that we've encouraged our boys, beyond us, to have also. And that's something that I'm just thinking about parents out there who might feel, our home is a bit broken or dysfunctional. We don't know what to do about that. We're trying our best to fix it, and they're struggling with that, and they're seeing their kids struggle. That if they could find somebody out of the home that they feel could be that mentor, who has the kind of values, who's pointing people, within, and who's got the kind of values that matter and are important. I think that's something practical that parents could look to. I think that's a nice point. And then the other thing you brought up, which is a whole conversation in of itself, but just to touch on it, I didn't want to gloss over it, is this thing of boundaries. I always think that, and again, it's one of the modules in this parenting course we're creating at the moment, is that balance of love and boundaries, because the two coexist, and discipline. The foundation of that has to be that there's a rapport and a good respect and a love. It's built on love, and then you can put those boundaries. But I see, even when we go into classrooms, I once had a teacher who was giving us a bit of experienced teacher training on going into classrooms, and she said, if you don't take kind of control of the classroom, the biggest ego in the room will, and then it's very hard to take it back. And I saw that, and kids want that. They want a teacher who they feel is in control of this classroom. And if not, they're going to try to take control because they feel that space, and it's like somebody's got to step into it. So, I love that you brought that up. I think it's a whole conversation in of itself, but it's an important one.
Yeah, and I understand that, because kids will always test the boundaries, they will always. And they will push it to the limit. And if they keep on pushing, they'll just keep on pushing. So somewhere along the line, you've got to say, that's not going to be tolerated here. And it's amazing. It's it's kind of like similar when you deal with a narcissist or somebody who's got a massive ego. They'll do exactly the same thing. They'll bully you. I'm talking about adults. You almost as well have to say, listen, you can do that with others. You don't do that with me, okay? And you'll find they take a step back. It's just
Yeah.
it's how we.
The dynamic shifts. Exactly. There's an adjustment that's made. I could talk to you about that forever, but I wanted to ask you just if you could give us like a short little piece on because we didn't. This is quite a powerful story of Candice and her journey, and we almost stopped it there, and we didn't talk about like what happened after she became clean, because she did become clean, which was incredible, and she had a life. She created a life for herself, and I wanted you if you could just help people see what happened in that little period.
So her coming out of Hillbrow was nothing short of a miracle, and her recovery was nothing short of a miracle. We had to smuggle her into Mozambique. There was a rehab center literally in the middle of nowhere, Bakashula, I think it's called, because we were scared that she would run away again, because the power of the drugs is, and we don't understand the power that drugs have unless you've been a drug addict. I mean, it's amazing that people will rehabilitate their entire life, go through that process, and then go back to that, I mean, which we find incredibly hard. Why would you do that? You know the consequences. But anyway, it's the power of the drug is incredibly powerful. We don't understand it. But she was there she ended up being there for nearly 5 years. The first 18 months was really recovery. And then she actually was on staff. But it was a really good thing that she was there for that long. And she also met a young guy there by the name of Alex, who later they got married. They were still in rehab when they got married, but they'd been there for at least 4 years when they got married. And of course, we were thrilled. Alex was a wonderful young man. And then they decided that they wanted to leave rehab, which is quite unusual. A lot of people who are addicts prefer to stay in that environment. I mean, and they could have, they had a job. And Alex was a silver trained chef, so at the highest level. And so he ran everything it was quite a big rehab center. They later moved to Nelspruit. And they eventually went, and Alex got a job at a lodge called Emily Moon in Plettenberg Bay, which is a very high-end lodge, beautiful. And they had two little girls, Rachie and Abigail. And then about maybe just over 4 years ago, 5 years ago, my wife and I took the kids away, our daughters, because I've got another daughter by the name of Verity. We went to Robertson, just spent time with them and the grandchildren. And I saw Candice wasn't looking well. And I never ever thought she'd gone back to it. That was never the issue for me. I just knew she wasn't well. And I mean, she was running 10Ks 3 times a week. She was super fit. She was eating healthy. And I said to her, Lovey, you need to. She said, Dad, I've been to the doctor, but the doctor hasn't picked up anything. He thinks it's period pain or whatever. Anyway, I said, promise me when you get home that you'll go. And she did. Anyway, after much, it took them a day and a half. They then sent her for scans, and they found an 11-inch tumor on her left kidney. And Candice, that time, was tiny. I mean, she was fit. Anyway, it was complicated because the tumor was that big that it was intertwined with the blood vessels and everything else. And she had to have quite a big operation. And they, as a family, went to Joburg to see the specialist. And they did the op. And at first they said it was successful. then 2 days later, she had to go back into hospital, and they found out that there'd been internal bleeding. And quite honestly, Terry, that was just, she went then to 3 different hospitals and had 9 operations in 7 weeks as they try and fix the problem. And I remember it was a Tuesday, and the surgeon, I was literally in ICU for 2 months with Candice and with Alex. And the surgeon said to me, they're going to have another op, but they can't keep on doing this. And Alex wasn't there. I was there when she came out. She came and she put her arm on my shoulder and said to me, Paul, there's nothing more we can do for Candice. There's nothing left. And I suppose I half and half expected it, but that moment, and then the hardest thing, I mean, they said, look, somebody has to tell her because they want to bring her out of a coma to tell her. And doctor said, look, she can tell her. And I said, no, Alex and I will tell her. And I mean, that, we'd become incredibly close, and just sitting next to the bed and holding her hand and saying, my love, I'm sorry, there's nothing more they can do for you. We've brought the girls, they're going to say goodbye. They don't know what and that was on the 8th of September, 4 years ago. And we had to turn off the machines. And she'd been clean for 10 years, Terry, 10 years. She'd been a role model for 10 years. Wow. And I think my faith and my whole belief system was shattered. I never, ever thought she wouldn't make it. And I suppose I comfort myself in the fact that she didn't die in the streets of Hillbrow with a heroin needle in her arm, because I don't know how I would have lived with that. But in many respects, she died victorious in that she gave us 2 beautiful little girls who are just the image of their mom. And she's left a legacy, a powerful story, and 1 million strong exists because of Candice,
Yeah.
So I wish it was otherwise, but it wasn't to be. And I still don't understand, and I will never understand. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And it's interesting because when you hear about your story, it almost feels like this fairy tale where everything all happily ending, and which isn't life often. Sometimes it can be, maybe, but there was an ending, which was, I mean, it's still going on for you, I'm sure, because grief doesn't end. It was painful, and in a way it feels unfair, because it feels like Candice, she almost had a rebirth, but in a way that feels beautiful, because as you say, that rebirth has left such a legacy of what's possible. Her story is very, very inspiring, and she's got these 2 beautiful girls, these 2 beautiful children they are girls, right? Did she have 2 girls?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, that she's kind of left, that continue her legacy. But of course it's painful for you, because you found her and then you had her, which might seem 10 years long, but it's short, and then lost her again. How are you coping, you and your wife? Like, how are you coping with the grief? How's that process been for you?
I think what helped me tremendously was that I set myself a goal to write a book about our journey. which I titled Beautiful Soul. I haven't published the book yet. I might still, I don't know. But it was just my way of dealing. I love to write. And so it was my way of dealing with pain, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, as you rightfully, you don't ever recover. And, time is a healer in that, because I don't think one can ever live with that intense emotion that I felt for that first 8 months. I just think something would happen. You can't, I don't think we're wired. I can at least now speak about Candice without falling apart. So, although sometimes I do fall apart, but well, I don't think I really fall apart, but I get very emotional. But I, I, th- I would like to believe, Terry, that we've done good. I would like to feel, 6 months or not even 6 months, maybe 2 months after Candy passed away, I flew to Dallas and spoke at a conference where my spiritual father was. He asked me to speak about Candice, and I somehow managed to fumble my way through that. But and Candice is a massive, she would want me to do what I'm doing. And she would say to me, Dad, don't be a wuss. She really would. It's like,
Yes. Yes.
I
She
know
was
that. She would be the one cheering me on, and 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 that's an inspiration to me. That. So to be honest, Terry, I have no choice because I would be letting Candace down. I have no choice. I have to do what I do. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to. Yes, it's painful. Of course it is. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be human. And I have, when you've had that intense journey with your child, so of course we all have choices. I could choose to be angry with God. I could choose to turn my back on everything, but I'm not going to do that. And I'm not a hero. People often say, "Oh, well done, Paul." Da, da, da. I don't need to hear that because I'm not a hero. I'm just a broken soul doing what my daughter would want me to do. That's all I am. Like a little lost boy fulfilling what my child would want me to do.
So she'd be very, very proud. Very, very proud. And you're such an inspiration. I mean, just Paul, because that kind of resilience, that innate resilience and innate health in all of us, which is really what this podcast is about, you just embody it, the full expression of it. And that resilience does not exclude pain and grief and loss at all. It's a part of it, but it has hope, and it has hope, and it has aspiration, and it has an energy and a vitality to it, which you have, which is beautiful. But I want to ask you, what's it going to take for us to get you to publish that book? Because I want to read that book. I think it's a book that many people would, get a lot from.
Well, I suppose I wrote it in a deep sense of pain. I probably need to send it to somebody to read and to edit it. I think initially I didn't want anybody to edit it because it was my story.
It's personal.
But I'm ready for it to be edited. So I'm happy to send it to you, Terry, and you were happy to edit it.
Yeah.
And we can
Well,
publish it. We'll
I think
jointly publish it.
let's speak, because I think that's I think it's going to be an important book, and then I think
I do, and I think I write from and funny enough, you played that little clip earlier where Candice, she said, and I've watched that clip many times,
yeah.
but she actually says she felt it in her soul.
Yes. Yes.
And that almost, I like, wow, I can't remember that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would love the book to be out there, and if it helps somebody give hope for somebody or whatever. But it probably does need some editing, and but I'm ready for that, Terry, to be honest. It's quite funny, well, not funny, strange in a way, that literally in the last 2 3 weeks I have been invited on 2 podcasts, a television station, a whole thing on Saturday morning. And Liz, my wife, said to me, she said, "Oh, Candy's been busy, eh? She's keeping," and I didn't contact anybody. It's like
Don't
you
be a
come
lazy
out of the
slut.
woodwork. It's like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, I feel the timing is ready, and whatever. And I know I don't have any goals or aspirations to sell 100,000 books or 200. It's not that. I just feel that it's probably not going to be a book that everybody wants to read. And I actually don't go into too much detail of Candice's journey. The book is more around our soul and what that means and how we become. Because I do believe my sole purpose in life. We always think, what's our sole purpose in life? I honestly believe our sole purpose in life is to become a healthy living soul. Somebody that is so not perfect, because none of us are perfect, but to be a healthy soul that we can help others. And so if Candice has helped me, and I think I'm certainly not the same person I was before Candy passed away, that's for sure. And I'd like to believe I'm a better person. As I said, I'm certainly not perfect. But that journey has certainly challenged my thinking, where
Yeah.
God is no longer the genie in the bottle.
Yes. Well, these moments in our lives, we have to go deeper. We have to look deeper,
Yes.
because what we have almost doesn't feel like it's enough. So it almost forces a new level of depth, and that's beautiful.
It doesn't have to be accompanied by something.
Do you know what? It's so funny, Paul, because you know what I think? I personally, this is just Terry's 2 cents worth. I often think that it doesn't have to, but because we're a little bit lazy in that way, we get complacent. God gives us a gift, like it's almost a gift of love, which feels very painful, but it's enabling us to dig deeper, to do what we need to do in the world. But sometimes we need, we have to have the lesson, because we get complacent, without it. In Judaism, there's a word for it. It's called Yisurim Shalava, which means like suffering with love. It's built on love.
Yes.
It looks like it's built. People think that it's built with a smack, that God's giving it to us, but it's actually built with love, because it's put there to evolve us in a way that we just wouldn't naturally evolve, because of human nature.
Yes.
But Paul, first of all, I could talk to you forever. This has just been amazing. I have one last question before I let you go, and I've got a feeling we're going to invite you back, because there's so many threads that I feel that I'd still like to explore with you. But I want to just leave you with, what are you learning or reflecting on right now? Like right now in your life, what are you learning or reflecting on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think, and it's kind of like every interviewee kind of like says, that's a really good question. But I'm not being patronizing in any way whatsoever, but it is a good question. I think there's a couple of things. Intentionality, um, to be intentional about what I do, and in every way, even who I spend my time with, what I watch, who I listen to, who I speak to, who I socialize with. I want to be intentional. And I think the second part of that is congruence, is to be or strive to be 100% congruent. Um, and I think if those two things could line up, that I could be congruent in my intentionality, if you like. I don't know if that sounds weird or twisted or confusing, But I think the world needs more congruent people. We need people who are what they say they are, who live what they teach. You know, that's, Jesus spoke about salt and light, is to be that salt and light of a kingdom that represents good, truth, justice, and to stand by that and do all we can to not just teach it, but to live it. That everybody we come into contact with sees that there's a deep level of almost beyond ethics and integrity, just this something that's almost a sense of wholeness, coming back to a healthy living soul. And I'm not there, by the way. I'm not there. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but and my wife, I would tell her, listen, if you find I'm not being congruent, then you need to tell me,
That's
as
beautiful.
friends. Yeah.
Beautiful. I mean, if you talk about, we often say in our heart, our values are aspirational. Values are always aspirational, something, but we take them seriously, and we hold up, there's something to hold us, and that's beautiful. I mean, I felt incredibly inspired. I mean, that's given me something to reflect on and take on. I'm sure our listeners and viewers as well. There's an integrity that you have, Paul, that when the messages that you're putting out to the young people, you can see they're coming from the heart, they real messages coming, from the heart to the heart. And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Just thank you so much. This was such a wonderful dialogue, and really, really appreciate what you're doing in the world. I said before in the introduction that there are links to your website, and people can see how to get involved with 1 Million Strong, and and I think there's a web to the video as well. And just thank you so much, Paul. Thanks for coming on.
And thank you for the invite, Terry. It's really been nice reconnecting with you. Really appreciate that. And yeah, the work that you guys are doing is amazing, especially around the parents and everything you're doing. I just think there's so many synergies, and I just love the fact that we can have these conversations. And yeah, I honestly don't think it's over. So
Yeah, no, not at all. Definitely not. Thanks, Paul.
God bless you, bless the work you do, and look forward to catching up again, Terry. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow or subscribe so that you can stay up to date with our latest episodes.